Okay, good evening, everybody. 4 o'clock on the West Coast, 5 o'clock on the Mountain Time and Central, and all the way to the East Coast. We have customers with us today. Welcome to the Chardonnay tasting tonight. This is probably our sixth or seventh or eighth event. Hopefully, you had a chance to pick up the flyers in the store. There's some tasting mats on the back of them if you did. And we are tasting today through 1 through 4. You'll see the numbers located on that tasting mat. You'll also be able to ask questions in the chat box, so please feel free to shoot our host these questions, anything you'd like to learn more about. I'm excited to introduce to you our host for tonight. Hopefully you're a reoccurring guest, but if not, Group Vice President for Albertsons Companies. He oversees all the wine, beer, and spirits for the company across the nation. Curtis Mann, he's a master of wine. Some have heard of sommeliers, masters of wine. To be a master of wine, it takes a massive amount of studying and knowledge in the world of wine. Very intense program. You have to pass an exam, the written test, but a blind tasting, practical skills in art, science, business, and of course wine. A hefty research paper goes along with becoming a master of wine. Can anybody be a master of wine? Absolutely. Takes a lot of work, as I just mentioned before. But tell you what, is very difficult. There's just over 50 in the United States and 400 worldwide. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Curtis Mann to take you through these great Chardonnays tonight, and I hope you enjoy it.
You're on mute, Curtis.
See, I still thanks for giving me the mute. See, I owe a lot of money to a lot of people. We do it at Albertsons. If you're on mute, every person gets $1. Sorry about that. All right, I'm just working on getting this presentation up and running here. Okay, so the Chardonnay virtual tasting today that we're going to go through. We have some with our introduction which Chris just went through. We have some fun facts. We're going to talk about how Chardonnay is influenced, how the flavors of Chardonnay are influenced. We're going to do some wine tasting, and then we're going to have some questions. So first off, the first thing is that please make sure that, well, you don't have to make sure, and I'm not telling you to drink, but please feel free to open up any of the wines and taste them as we're talking about them. This is supposed to be a fun tasting. It's a Thursday, going into a long weekend, so you're here to enjoy yourself, and that's what wine is all about, is enjoying ourselves, right? And what I'm going to help you do is learn more about it so that you can enjoy it even more. And these are the 5 wines that we have that we're tasting today, and the kind of order I picked was in order of lightness to weight to heaviness. So you can taste them in this order, but you can also go backwards too. It's Chardonnay, luckily, so it's not like you're going from a really high extracted tannin wine like Cabernet or Syrah and then back to Chardonnay. So it should be fine whatever order you want to taste them in while you're there, and feel free to rate the wines and write down some of your own notes as we kind of talk through them, and as I discuss some of the wines here. And then again, as Chris said, feel free to ask questions whenever you want. I'm going to try to keep my eyes on my phone so I can help answer any of those questions that come through. If there's a pertinent question, I'll hopefully get to it. And so we'll go from there. All right. So excellent. So with that out of the way, here's some Chardonnay fun facts. Last time I talked about Chardonnay, it's one of the biggest varietals in the United States. It's I think the 7th largest grown varietal in the world. And it's really actually one of probably the most commercially relevant wines in the world. But there's some other interesting things about Chardonnay that they're out there. So from the 1930s and 1950s, Chardonnay was actually known as Pinot Chardonnay in the United States. And it's kind of interesting because Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are grown in the same place in France. And so a lot of that came from the idea that, people thought it was the same grape varietal. And you can make a white Pinot Noir, which somewhat tastes a little bit like Chardonnay. So I guess that's where that confusion came from. Another thing that's kind of interesting, and we're going to talk about a wine that's from France today, But Chablis is made from the Chardonnay grape varietal, and a lot of folks don't realize that, and they just say they want Chablis, and the reality is that actually Chablis is Chardonnay. And Chablis lately has been getting a lot of really positive press. Wines have been outstanding, and so it's definitely one of those wines. We don't have one that was distributed everywhere in the United States, so I didn't bring that a Chablis today, but it's a great Chardonnay to explore. And then, one of the most famous Chardonnays in the world is actually Corton Charlemagne. So that's the region in Burgundy. It's a Grand Cru area designated, so the best of the best. And it's actually named after the famous emperor on the hill in Burgundy. It kind of references back to Chardonnay itself as one of the core varietals, like, one of those that's known for essentially almost antiquity, right? It's became famous in the 800s. And then, throughout the 1400s, it became elevated to one of the most, important grape varietals of Burgundy. And then from there, it spread across the world. So it's a very important, grape varietal. And it's interesting that it took, probably until the early 2000s for it to become really big in the United States, but it's always been big across the rest of the world. So we're going to talk about kind of where the flavors of Chardonnay come from, and we've talked about this before, but I wanted to kind of get a little bit more in depth about the different types of Chardonnay, because Chardonnay is a grape varietal that can be, heavily influenced from its location, from where it's grown, and also from its vineyards, and from its winemaking. And so it's probably the most manipulated white wine. I say manipulate doesn't sound like a good term, but really like the winemaker has the most influence. It's almost like a raw canvas. And so that's why these wines taste so differently. But there's also some things that happen in the vineyard that change the way the wine tastes. So let me see if we got any good questions here yet. The beauty of Teams. No questions just yet, but actually, so I did get one question. Are there different types of Chardonnay clones? So we're going to talk about what goes on in the vineyard. We're going to talk about what's going to go on in the winemaking, but there's also one other piece is that similar to kind of going along within the vineyard, there are different types of basically vine material that influences different parts of the way that the Chardonnay grape tastes after it's made into wine. So we're going to talk about like the minerality of the soil and the heat index and how that changes. But the one other piece of this is that these clone varietals or these clonal clones. So basically you have Chardonnay as a varietal, but then there's different versions of Chardonnay, like the Wente clone. Some of them are more aromatic than others. And so you get this kind of differing dramatic character in, there's a little more tropical flavors, say, in the Wente clone than maybe there might be in like a clone 5 or clone 6. So that is an influence too. So that's a good question. In fact, I almost got ahead of myself a little bit there, answering that in that question there. Let's see. I think that was the only one so far. Yeah, actually, well, and then there's another question. If Chablis and Chardonnay come from the same grape, how do they differ? Why is Chablis so popular right now? Oh, we're getting a lot of great questions right at the beginning. And so that's a great question. So what's happening kind of in the world of wine is that Chablis is on the northern extent of cool climate Chardonnay. It's about basically as cold as it can get. And people are really searching out that style. It's like a high acid, bright flavor, very mineral style of wine. And so that's why it's become more and more popular. And over the last, say, 10 years, as the world has gotten warmer, this area, specifically Chablis, has kind of had this combination of minerality plus fruit extraction. And so there's absolutely stunning wines coming out of the area. The one challenge is there's been some pretty dramatic frost over the last couple of vintages, so there's not a lot of Chablis to be had. But yes, people are starting to rediscover Chablis. Grape varietal used to be a region used to be very popular in the 70s and 80s, and now it's back. All right, so two great questions to start this thing off. Okay. All right, so vineyards, this is a vineyard site in New Zealand, or actually this is in Australia, but, there's Chardonnay's grown practically everywhere. And so there's a lot of great options as to where to get the Chardonnay. This one is a good example of a vineyard that has a slope to it. So it's a north-facing vineyard because in the southern hemisphere you want to be north-facing, meaning you get a lot of the extra sun. but it's cool climate. So the weather rarely in the Yarra Valley you rarely get over, say, the mid 70s. So you get all that sun, cool climate, you get these nice extracted wine with a lot of fruit minerality and density. So really a very kind of a classic Chardonnay cool climate area. And what we're asking, well, what does that mean? Well, here's kind of an index, I guess, of Yarra Valley, of saying it's a little bit warmer, but still, even then, it's not really super warm. These are what I would say, are the grape characteristics that come out of warmer climates and cooler climates. And so most Chardonnay is actually grown, most high quality Chardonnay is actually grown in coolish climates. So Napa Valley, even though it's the highest on my heat index, it's actually pretty cool. I should have probably not even put red in there. Like, I could have kept it to just a light shade of blue. And going down into, Baden, Germany, which is the coldest. And so that's how really, probably more than anything else than, vineyard site and all those other pieces, the true characteristic of Chardonnay is determined by the mesoclimate and the microclimate in the area of that the wines are grown. So you can see that the Chablis, which is this extreme cool climate, Burgundy is number 3 on this list. Chablis could probably go to number 1, like Baden, Germany. You get this really floral kind of pear, green apple, and as you get warm, you get those tropical, orange, mango, pineapple characteristics. We're going to taste some wines today, and you're going to get a good example, very cool climate, or pretty cool climate, which the make calls pretty cool climate, and then you're going to get all the way to the extreme to the warmest climate, and you're going to see the differences in the styles of the wine as we talk through that. So I'll make sure to kind of point out what the climate kind of intensity is from wherever we are. All right, so looking to see if there's any more questions. But isn't Chablis a region in Burgundy? Yes, so Chablis is a region in Burgundy. But Chablis, in order to be called Chablis, the wine has to be made from the Chardonnay grape. So that's where Chablis and Burgundy are related. I mean, sorry, Chablis and Chardonnay are related, and then Burgundy is the bigger appellation, right? So Chablis sits within Burgundy. So hopefully that makes sense on that question. Okay, and the one thing that I kind of wanted to talk about, which is a hot topic these days, is that sustainability is becoming bigger and bigger, and also especially with Chardonnay, the grape itself is being, it's being produced more and more locations. It's a big production wine, and there's a lot of folks that are considering, like, well, how do I make the best quality Chardonnay, and then also be responsible steward of the environment? And so here are some of the things that are going on. In fact, the big reason I did this and talk about this is because we actually have 2 wines specifically that are driven at sustainability and organic viticulture, and the other ones, while they don't state it, I don't believe, they don't state as much on the back. These wines still do have a sustainability kind of play to them. So a lot of these wines that I picked, and a lot of the wines we're picking for the stores really honestly kind of fit that mold. And so just want to quickly talk about what we have. We have these different levels of sustainability. We have sustainable grape growing. That fits into things like the Lodi rules, which are, a set of rules that are put together by a region like Lodi, saying, hey, I want to create a wine that is, that's responsible for the environment. I'm not going to go all the way to organics because that might imply that certain things have to happen. But I'm going to go sustainable, and so more and more wineries are doing this. The certified organic, the CCOF, which is the California Certified Organic, that is completely organic grape growing, so you can't use synthetic pesticides during the production of the wine. At least 70% of the grapes have to be from an organic vineyard, and most of the people that use the CCOF, it's 100%, and that's because the rules sometimes change, and it's not really worth the, hey, I only made 70%, now 30% or not. So while that rule is 70%, it's usually more, and realistically in practice 100%. There's also organic wine, and we actually make a very nice one at all of our stores called the Organics. That wine has to be organically grown, and it can't be produced. It has to be produced organically, meaning you can't add sulfur dioxide. It creates a different kind of situation where the wine isn't as stable, but if you drink it within a year of bottling or so, It's a really nice little wine, and it's completely organic. There's some other topics like biodynamic, and people are like, what is biodynamic? And biodynamic is basically kind of almost like an extreme form of organic. And I feel bad about saying extreme. It's not. It's just like it's a more in-depth form. It has to do with the the phases of the moon. It was developed by Rudolf Steiner. It's an interesting farming technique. And you do things like you bury manure and horns, and it really is a little bit out there if you think about it. But it does it's kind of about the whole system. And so biodynamic wines are becoming more and more popular. A lot of the very famous producers around the world, and a lot of the folks that are making like super high-end Burgundy, white Burgundy, so from Chardonnay, are employing these because they're seeing some dramatic positives in their vineyards, even though nobody can really explain to me what why biodynamics is better than organic. But a really interesting topic. And then there's a couple other things that are out there. There's a term natural wine that's being thrown around a lot. It doesn't really have a defined term in the United States. And so I'd be careful with that one. Technically the organics is a natural wine. We don't call it natural wine, but there's natural wine usually doesn't have, like I said, sulfur added to it. So it's kind of like a sulfite free, like the next thing you mentioned. But I think you're better off like looking for these like determinations of organic or, certified sustainable, something that's actually defined, because in the definition, the wineries have to follow the rules to meet that need. So, all right. So, we talked about that overview there. Okay, and here's a good question, and I guess I can answer this now. And maybe because you're, probably in process of taking the wines out of the refrigerator and tasting them. Normally, Chardonnay is consumed chilled. Discuss the difference between chilled versus room temperature. So what I would say is that the best way to consume Chardonnay is around 42 to 45 degrees. And get the wine just a touch warmer than cold, because when the wine's cold, it's muted. But if it gets too warm, if it's 65, 70 degrees, then some of those flavors are a little bit too forward, and then the wine is not as elegant. So we actually, when we taste wines, we, as a wine buyer for a grocery store, a lot of times I'll taste them warm just to see, because the flaws in the wine are a little bit more obvious. But just straight up for enjoyment, I think it's best if you enjoy them at a cooler temperature. All right. So, these are the ways that this is basically the basics to Chardonnay winemaking. I'm not going to spend a lot of time as part of this, but the one thing I will say is that one of the important things to making really high quality Chardonnay is in the crushing of the grapes, is to not over crush, to have a gentle, soft crush, so you don't get a lot of the grape tannins, because it's a white wine, so you don't really want those grape tannins. And additionally, it's probably best not to use the grape skins. There was a policy, but like a kind of a temptation in the early 2000s for a lot of producers of Chardonnay in California to include the grape skins, and then the wines were like a green hue, and some of the wines were a little less than stellar. That's a really, I think the most important part of this is that you're taking grape varietal, and some of it has a lot of flavor in the skins. But you don't want to extract too much flavor in the skins, otherwise the wine becomes overdone, and can almost have like a physical mouthfeel that's a little bit too much. So that's a big part of making really high quality Chardonnay, is that crushing, the pressing, and being gentle with it. And then of course, the other thing that that's important is the malolactic fermentation, which is that secondary fermentation. So it's there's a number of different acids. There's tartaric acid, there's malic acid, it's part of the grape, and that malic acid breaks down into lactic acid, which is like milk, easier to drink. And Chardonnay is the grape varietal that's most known for having a malolactic fermentation. So, all right. And then another couple things we'll talk about here are lees stirring. Just checking to see if there's any more questions. And I do want to get us through this so that we can taste the wines, because I'm sure there'll be questions during that. So these are, a couple of key things about Chardonnay styles. We have, the wines that are made in tank, wines that are made in barrel. And so there's wines that are aged in tank, wines that are, fermented in barrel, and those change the style of the wines. And we're going to see that. We're going to taste some of those wines today, and some of them have 100% barrel fermentation. Some of them are, mostly tank with a little barrel fermentation. So you're going to see the kind of the difference there as we, taste the wines. There's also a huge discussion about oak, and how the wine is aged in that oak. You can ferment the wine, but then do you also take the wine and age it in an oak vessel? How big is that oak? Is it is it a Burgundy barrel? Is it 228 liters? Is it a big Foudre, which is like 1,000 liters? Is it a tank that imparts no flavors at all, or no oxidative character? So it's really reductive, meaning that there's been no oxygen allowed into the wine. And so some of these wines, you're going to see some of the more barrel ones, we're going to call them more along the oxidative side, which means that they've had some oxygen introduced into the wines very slowly over time. And then we're going to taste a couple. One of them, in fact, I think the Buntera was quite a reductive style, a bright wine without a lot of oak and influence to the wine. And then, we talked about malolactic versus no malolactic, and then we had the lees stirring versus no lees stirring. So the other thing that, during the process of aging the wine, you can use the lees, which are the dead yeast cells. So the wine, is the yeast takes the sugar, eats the sugar, creates carbon dioxide and alcohol. But you don't have to take the yeast out right away. You can leave it in, and it adds a flavor characteristic. Hopefully you're being subtle about it and it's not overdone. Sometimes too much lees storing and too much lees contact can turn the wine into basically smelling like dead yeast, which is not fun. But the other advantage is that lees also protect the wine. It's not particularly well explained, but they have a way of keeping the wine from getting overly oxidized. And so it's used in a lot of very high-end production of wine. And more actually in the commercial side of the business too. Okay, so let's see if there's any other questions. Well, actually, there's one question that says, where does Sauvignon Blanc fall in Chardonnay and Chablis discussion? So that's a good question. So a Chablis, so Sauvignon Blanc is actually not made in the Burgundy region, with the exception of one small little region called Saint-Brie, which is a very interesting region, and really there's very little of it produced. But Sauvignon Blanc is more known from the Loire Valley, and so Burgundy kind of sits in the middle of it's basically southeast of Paris, and the Loire region is directly south of Paris, and so they're actually quite close to each other. But if as the crow flies, but it's quite hard to get to the two. In fact, I did that drive about 2 months ago, and it's a pretty long drive between the Loire Valley and Burgundy. So they're kind of grown in similar areas. Sauvignon Blanc is more acidic. Maybe Chablis is as being the most acidic Chardonnay, is close to Sauvignon Blanc in acidity, but Sauvignon Blanc retains its acidity even in really warm climates. So while Chardonnay will become broad in what we call medium or medium minus acidity, Sauvignon Blanc typically, even in warm climates like Napa, will still be very bright acidity. So that's a good question. And then the other difference being that the Chardonnay grape varietal is a lot less aromatic than Sauvignon Blanc. So no matter what, pretty much in any case, the Sauvignon Blanc is going to be brighter aromatically. So, all right. And then so we have, this is the style kind of guide that I put together: oak, no oak, creamy, not creamy, which has to do with the lees and the malolactic. And then, a bunch of different things that we can look at as far as what are the flavors in the wines. So this is a kind of a good tool and a guide. You have the grape aromas, the winemaking aromas, and the aging aromas, and those three really make the piece of the wine. And then the minerality kind of sits in there, some weird location that comes from the grape, but it's still not highly defined. It's hard to taste it, but you'll know it when it's there. In fact, there's some good minerality in a couple of these wines. Okay. All right. We had a question. We're going to taste the wines first, and then I think I'm going to get to this question that way. because it's already 421 or 521 or 621, wherever you are across the country. So the first wines that we have are this is wine from Burgundy. So we remember we talked about Burgundy and actually talked about Chablis a lot, even though we don't have a Chablis to taste, but you should go out and get one after this training. So, or after this tasting, you can see that Burgundy is here in the kind of, like I said, southeast of Paris. You have Chablis, which is at the top. You have the Côte de Nuit, Côte de Beaune, and Côte Chalonnaise, and then the Mâconnais. And this wine that we're going to taste is from the Mâconnais. So it's the Louis Jadot Mâcon Village. And Mâcon is the city in the area, and this is kind of the general overall Mâcon area. It's actually bigger than this, but the picture wouldn't fit on the screen. Thank you to the Bourgogne Visitors Bureau, Vin de Bourgogne. They do a great job giving us some of these maps here. And so time to taste the wine. And basically, this is a this is a Burgundy. This is a white Burgundy. It's made from Chardonnay from the Mâcon region. It's got partial malolactic fermentation, and the question was what do you think about Chardonnay fermented, aged 100% in stainless steel? This wine is not 100%, but it's got a lot of stainless steel in it. And what you're going to see is that real lack of kind of tactile oak character on the palate, and also the wine is bright, and it doesn't have, there's just a tiny bit of oak character to the wine. And that's really kind of a signature, more of something that's a little bit more tank fermented. There's definitely a little bit of oak on this wine, but you can tell that the tank, the brightness of the wine, the forward fruit, that tank fermentation really retains that, and so that's why a lot of people really enjoy like kind of unoaked Chardonnay, because and this is, like I said, it's not completely unoaked. It's actually really nicely balanced with that touch of oak, but that freshness brings out a really pleasant character in the wine. And you can see here, like shellfish or another type of light fish is perfect for this wine. They said red apples. That's I do like that term. So Mâcon is the warmest region in Burgundy. And I always think of ripeness in Chardonnay according to apples. So red apples would be the ripest. I mean, actually, Fuji apple would probably be the ripest. Then a red apple, then a yellow apple, and then a green apple, right? So I think of apples, and then I think of, Burgundy. So maybe, red apples is a good descriptor for Mâcon. Yellow apple is a good descriptor for the Côte de Beaune, where some really famous wines are made, and they're a little riper. And then, green apple is a great descriptor for Chablis, where it's, linear and cool climate, and these wines with a lot of tense acidity to them. So hopefully you enjoyed that wine. That's an interesting wine. Very well made. It's not very expensive, but I always enjoy it. Jadot does a really good job producing these wines that are approachable for everybody. They also make some very high-end wines that are super allocated that we put in some of our stores too, that are also delicious. So that was a fun one. All right. The next wine is an interesting wine, and this is why I had put up that whole thing and talked about sustainability. This is the Buntera. And Buntera is known, they have a history of being the leaders in the organic space in the United States. And so they've created this wines made with organic grapes. And so I thought it'd be fun if we tasted it. It's also not very expensive, which is always impressive to me, because the production of organic wine is very complicated, in the sense that unless you have perfect weather, like they do sometimes in Napa, there are some disease pressures, and if you can't use those pesticides or herbicides, then you have to really kind of put a lot of folks in the vineyard. There's got to be a lot of handwork, to prevent the molds and the rots and all the things that can happen with grape growing, which is actually, once you kind of study it, you realize, oh gosh, this is way more complicated than I thought it was going to be. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for them to produce a wine that's, in the mid-teens or even less in some cases, and produce a Chardonnay with a nice quality, considering all the pieces that have to go into it. So this is another example of a wine that's kind of partially barrel fermented, and it's got mostly American oak. And you can get a little bit of that like kind of vanilla, dillish character out of the American oak. It's got a, if you can tell from the Macon, the Macon, it was kind of danced across the palate. It had a higher acidity. It's a cooler climate. Although Macon is the warmest region of Burgundy, it's still not nearly as warm as say parts of Mendocino County, which is where this wine is sourced out of. Mostly, it says California, but most of the wines come from the ranches that Buntera has. And so you can see that weightiness to the wine. It's elegant, but it has a depth and a power to it. And so this is kind of like I think grilled trout is a perfect combination with this wine. It does have that nice creamy finish, but you can get that kind of a little bit of weight to the wine. There's a question that says, organic is important in my home. Why aren't there more organic wines? And I kind of mentioned it before. It is in most regions in the world, it's very hard to do organic because of all the disease pressures and because of the fact you can't use synthetic pesticides. So you have to spray more with sulfur. You have to, you can't use Roundup, which is probably a good thing. But so that means that you have to go through the vineyard about 3 or 4 more times than the average, than a non-organic, because you have to mow. You might have to do things like change the way the trellis is set up because you need to make sure that the the leaves are far enough apart so you can have air through the canopy. There's a lot of things that have to be considered to make organic wine, or wines made with organic grapes, should I say. And so that's why the Buntera is somewhat unusual. I think that, one thing that's important is that we just, continue to learn about the organic wines. And there's a lot of great producers out there that are making organic wine, but not necessarily putting on the label. And we should pressure a lot of them to put it on the label, because I think it's really important as we keep going forward to tell people more about what organic is and not. So hopefully that answers your question. I know that, it's usually depending on where you are. Like if you're in Napa, it might only be, twice as much to farm an organic vineyard than it would be if you were conventional. But other places like Lodi, or places in Germany where there's like a tremendous amount of rain, it could be upwards of 3 to 4 times as much to farm organic. And so, but nobody seems to, well, I say nobody, but there hasn't been a desire for everyone to pay the extra money because it says organic on it. So I think a lot of folks have struggled with that. A lot of wineries have struggled with that. So. Yeah, and then the question was, is Buntera vegan? And then David, who's on my team, did a great job answering it. The white is vegan. The reason why the wine would not be vegan would be because sometimes egg whites are used to fine the wines. Luckily, I mean, you don't generally need to fine white wines with egg whites, as far as I'm aware. So the Buntera would be vegan, but the red wines are fined. The egg whites help reduce the tannins, so the bite of the wine. So if you're vegan, I guess you've got to stay away from the reds of Buntera, but you can drink the whites. Okay, another kind of fun winery that we really enjoy having on our shelves is Wente. They are kind of one of the classic original Chardonnays from California. They've been around for quite a long time, and they make a lot of great wines. And this Arroyo Seco Riva Ranch is Chardonnay is one of these wines that continues every year. I think this is 2020. This one hasn't been ready yet, but the 19, I believe, got 91 points in Wine Spectator. I mean, it's hard to find a better California wine for the price to value. And so it's fun to taste their wines. The other thing is they're a big part of the sustainability movement in the United States. They actually help us make one of the wines that we have in our stores called Caliana that's also sustainable. And so they've been on the forefront of that, taking their vineyard sites that they have in Livermore and in Arroyo Seco and converting them over to sustainable and organic, and then helping a lot of other folks get there too. So I think when we as far as this wine goes, It's mostly fermented in French oak with a little bit of tank fermentation. So you're going to we're going in, order of weight here. And so you can see this wine starting to build some weight. It's got a very pleasant forward, yellow apple. I mean, here it says lemon, lime, apple, cream. I agree with a lot of that. And definitely you can get the oak, right? The baking spices, they say almond and vanilla. I'd almost say that there's a little bit of, a little bit of that, maybe a touch of dill, just a little bit of spice to this wine. Really great combination with the kind of a heavier fare, right? So now we're getting into chicken that's got some, butter in it or whatnot, so that it can kind of be a combination, so it can balance against this wine. I'm looking at these questions. So what does fined with egg whites mean? Hopefully I answered that. Actually, I might have answered, but just so you know, fined, right? So what you do is you take the egg whites and you put them in the barrel, and then you drain them out of the barrel. They kind of come out of the barrel. And those egg whites, they bind with the tannins. And so many wines across the world are fined if they're super tannic. So generally not an important thing for white wines because they don't have any tannins or very little tannins. But for red wines, you're making a big, bold Cabernet. If you want to reduce its kind of power because it might be too tannic, you can do that. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed that Arroyo Seco, the Riva Ranch. Now, the Arroyo Seco is in Monterey. It's, very close to the San Lucas AVA, and the Santa Lucia Highlands AVA, which is kind of the most famous area for producing a really high-end Pinot. And so you're in this cool climate area, in this Monterey kind of in this canyon and Salinas. It gets this nice. It gets warm during the summer, but it also cools off at night. A lot of like the Bay Area, so you get these breezes that come in, and then the wines retain their acidity, but they also get extraction. So that's why I like this wine. I think that's why it does so well in the tastings. It has all the combination of everything, right? It's got weight, it's got acidity, because you can feel the acidity there, and brightness, and so it's a really nice little wine. A fun wine for a Thursday, for sure. All right. And thank you for Monterey County. Go visit Monterey County. They give us a map, so you can use the map and go visit some wineries. Most of the wineries don't exist. Just a heads up, they don't have a tasting room in the area like San Lucia Highlands, but in Carmel and Monterey, there's a lot of tasting rooms downtown, and so you can kind of, in some ways, it's even easier than say going to Napa or Sonoma where you have to drive around to the wineries. It's like, well, you can just walk to all the different winery locations. Okay. All right, so that is the Wente. All right, the next wine is the Rodney Strong. And so again, another producer that we enjoy is they're also committed to kind of sustainability. They make a lot of different types of kind of higher end wines out of their facility in in the north part of Sonoma. This wine specifically is from Chalk Hill, which it's kind of hard to see, but it's in between Dry Creek, Alexander Valley, and Russian River, and it's chalk. It kind of sits there. It's got limestone in it, which is perfect for growing Chardonnay. That limestone is theorized to create some of the minerality in the wine. Again, nobody seems to know the exact answer about that, but anyway, so you can see that it's kind of hard to see on this Visit Sonoma County map, which again, go visit them because we use their map. But you can kind of see it. It like runs through that line. If you see Russian River Valley, look right north, there's Chalk Hill. There's some wineries like Chalk Hill Winery, which you also sell a lot of, that have a lot of vineyard sites there. And it's become very well known for Chardonnay. And this one is I was surprised that, this is not a very expensive wine. I mean, it's not the most inexpensive wine we have on the shelves, but this is a lot of new French oak, 32% new, 14 months. So we're kind of going up the scale here as far as weight. And, it's interesting because for me personally, when I'm thinking about the differences between all the different regions in California, Sonoma County to me is generally more, it's generally creamier and less acidic than Monterey, even though the weather is very similar. In Monterey, I tend to get a higher acidity and then a more fruit extraction of like kind of guava and a little bit of the tropical fruits that maybe in the last wine. And Sonoma County tends to be more, and I can see it in this wine, more that like traditional yellow apple, red apple, a little bit less tropical flavors, a little bit creamier on the palate. And so these two are good. You know, in fact, all three of these wines are great wines. You can, you know, taste the difference. In fact, the last one, you can taste the difference between all the different regions, but we've got a pretty good regional difference in California. And I think all these wines are true to their regional character. And so they're good to taste next to each other because they really give you a concept of, oh, that's what that tastes like. And so, you know, this one, because of the creaminess, I think it's really great pairing with soft cheeses like a brie of some sort, or, you know, if you're maybe thinking of like a soft goat cheese or whatever, that might work too. Like this wine is going to go really well with that roundness. You know, or maybe like garlic bread or something that just is going to mix with that quite well. And I just, you know, I've always loved the Rodney Strong wines because they always punch way above their price point. And this is a great example of that. I mean, there's not a lot of people that at this price point put 32% new French oak on the wine, and you can definitely see it shows. And the thing about that too is that this is 2019, and so these wines with some new French oak on them, you can tell that the oak is a little bit obvious in this wine, right? If you taste this wine again, that vanilla is forward. It's there. Like, oh, you know, hey, I can taste it. And if you give it another 6 months, it's going to continue to integrate. And then it allows, you know, it's almost counterintuitive, but this oxidative aging allows the wine to kind of build structure in the barrel, and then it ages for a longer period of time. So I'm not saying you should age this for 10 years, but this could use another 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, and then it's going to round out, and then oak's going to integrate, and it's going to be even prettier than it already is. So kind of a fun wine in that sense. And again, they've done a good job managing the acidity in this wine. There's still some punchy acidity, even though there's a ripeness to it too. So hopefully fun. I just, you know, and just continue to be like kind of, you know, shocked a lot by Rodney Strong when I taste some of their wines. I'm like, what? We sell it for this? We could have got a lot more money out of that. All right. So that's the Rodney Strong. And then, of course, the last wine. Okay, so yeah, so now all the questions come through at once. It's funny, I can. Which wines are most similar to Acacia Carnera Chard? I would say that the Rodney Strong that we have, there's a couple of other ones in the store. I haven't actually tasted the Acacia in about a year or two. The vintage difference, but I'd say the Rodney Strong is probably the most consistent. Can you age a wine with a screw cap? Absolutely. Wines that with screw caps actually allow less oxygen in than cork screws. So sometimes it's even a better experience as to you can age these wines will stay fresher. Not always the case. There's some wines like, you know, that are really inexpensive that are in screw cap that, you know, just meant to be drunk young. But yeah, screw caps will definitely age. Please provide your insights on cork versus screw caps. Okay, so is it an impact to the taste or is it a cost factor? So in the end, the reason why everyone moved to screw caps was because of what was the problem was cork taint, right? So it used to be not so long ago, you know, maybe only 10, 15 years ago that basically one out of every 20 wines was corked because you had cork taint from the corks themselves. So the corks, you know, you get a mold that grows on there and then somehow bleach is introduced into the environment, you know, just not on purpose, but and then you'd get the bottles in there and the TCA taint would taint the wine. And so everyone was like, oh, what are we going to do about this? And the Australians said, we don't want any more TCA taint in our wine. We're going to move all the screw caps. And then the rest of the world kind of followed. It's not as much a cost factor as just a wine quality factor. However, there has been a new recent development in corks, which is actually Wente's using this cork. It's a DM cork, and it's a corrugated cork, and they basically supercritically heat, they send like supercritical CO2 through it, and it cleans the cork, and then it reconstructs it. And so people have been using these corks, and now I think it's something like 70% of the wines over $12 have DM corks in them now. So they're very similar to screw caps, and so they allow a little bit more air into the bottle over long periods of time, versus a screw cap is going to be a little bit more inert. There's going to be less oxygen. So it's kind of a mix these days. You're seeing more and more, and I think the closure is becoming less and less important. You would think it'd be cheaper to go screw cap, and it might be in a couple cases, but in the end, you have to have a different canning line, bottling line, should I say. And so oftentimes it ends up being just as expensive, if not more. In fact, I've looked at making wines and going, oh, well, I guess we'll just put a cork in it because it's not that much cheaper for a screw cap. So let's see. My Albertsons only had the Rodney Strong 2016. How is this different from the 19? So the Rodney Strong 2016 will most likely have a lot more developed characters. And so you're going to start to see a little bit of those oxidative characters. And hopefully it's a positive, and it should be a positive. I'm confident with how, well, these wines are made. And what it's going to do is it's going to give you a little more like creme brulee, a little bit of the more toastiness, and you're going to get that in the wine. And so it's going to show that development. And the fruit is not going to be as forward, but some of the best wines have some of the best Chardonnays have 3-4 years of age on them. And they really round out that fruit and create a delicacy to it. So, and there's a couple customers super excited about the price of the Chalk Hill Chardonnay. Like I said, pretty outstanding price for a wine with 32% new French oak on it. And then the final question before I get to the last wine is, when a wine is described as lightly oaked, what should I expect? And I think you should expect what we tasted in the first two wines, which was, hey, the winery's using 50% oak, 50% tank, and they're using neutral wood. So they're making the wine in an oxidative style, so it's not as bright and forward as a completely stainless steel wine. But it doesn't have the oak influence to it. So it doesn't have the vanilla, the butterscotch, the dill, or any of those pieces that oak will provide. So hopefully that helps you kind of gauge, we need to do a much better job in the wine industry telling people this has got this much oak in it. But if it says lightly oaked, hopefully that makes sense. All right. So then the last wine is the Bauer Chardonnay. And I wanted to taste this wine mainly because it's kind of iconic. Everyone talks about it. It's the original, or not the original, but Kendall Jackson Vintners Reserve Chardonnay and Bauer, like kind of the two that put Chardonnay on the map. And it's always good, I think, for me to go back and taste some of the classics, because people always say, well, this wine tastes like this. And then you realize, you go back and you taste the wines, you're like, oh, that's actually what it tastes like. I do apologize if you could not find this wine. We had set up this virtual tasting, and then, as it always goes with Bauer, they are so popular that they sold out at the winery. And so they did everything they could to get us as much stock as we could, but there might be some stores where we ran out. I sincerely apologize for that. It's supposed to be back in stock in September. Hopefully we were able to keep enough around for everybody, but it's a little bit different, a little bit challenging, especially in this day and age of supply shortages. So the Bauer, and the reason I wanted to taste the Bauer was because, again, there's this lot of perception that Bauer is buttery, oaky, big wine. And I think that, maybe 15 years ago it was that style, but it's become much more restrained. You can really taste it. It has a really nice blend of fruit. It's a yellow apple, the pear. And then it has that creme brulee character and a touch of oak, and then a nice, really beautiful finish to it. And to me, it's 100% malolactic fermentation, but this is not really buttery oaky. This is more like balanced buttery oaky, I guess you put it that way. And so very nice wine, and that's one of the reasons it's so popular, is because they've taken this wine and they've really, they make you want to have another sip. It's like making you thirsty for more, right? For for those of you who want to, recently, it was not too long ago, I went up to Ron Bauer and tasted a lot of their wines. For those of you who want that big over-the-top buttery oaky style, they make a reserve. And I think we sell it in a couple stores, but it's really hard to get. But from the winery, you can get it. And that's buttery oaky. That's like the, hey, pedal to the metal. So I really enjoyed this wine. You know, and of course, it's a nice wine to open for the weekend. But you know, I think it does well there. And again, I think similar to the Wente, with that oak characteristic, it really needs something like, you know, with some depth to it, like the roasted chicken. So the wine is actually sourced out of Carneros, in case you're, you know, wondering where the heck that is. That is on the southern side of Napa, and it actually spans both Sonoma and Napa. And so Carneros is the very bottom of this map. And thanks again, Co-Brand, for letting us use this. It's actually, Ron Bauer's not a Co-Brand wine, but the Jadot is. So we appreciate them letting us use their maps. And so you see Carneros down there at the very bottom of this Napa map. And then there's a little bit, and then there's Carneros also in Sonoma. It's a very unusual appellation that it crosses county lines. I don't know if there's really any other, at least in California, that do that. And so somebody asked a question, and I'll look again, but I think it was about consistency. And one says, how does Ron Bauer taste exactly the same every year, even though the weather changes each vintage? And I would say it doesn't taste exactly the same. So vintage to vintage, you'll see sometimes the aromatic characters is really mainly what to me changes, right? So sometimes you get more of the, you know, red apple. Sometimes you get more of the yellow apple. Sometimes you get a little bit more aromatics. The very, very ripe years. I believe it was, I think it was 19. One of the years it was very dry and ripe. The wine was much more tropical than a cooler year. And so it does change a little bit, but agreed, it is consistent. And the reason is because they have some vineyard sources in South Napa, in the Carneros region. I believe they source from Hyde. There's these vineyards that are basically year in and year out, old vine, or at least close to old vine stock, and they're just consistent. They create these grapes that are almost the same. There's a question: was this made in a lab? No, I mean, all wines have some, you know, chemical analysis done to them, but they've figured out the formula to match with these vineyard sites, and that's why it tastes consistent. And honestly, Chardonnay is a little easier, I think, than Cabernet, where you have, you know, or Merlot or Pinot, where you have a red grape and ripeness becomes more of a factor. You can pick Chardonnay, you know, as long as you pick it alcohol ripeness, the flavors don't change nearly as much as they do in some of those other grape varietals. So, yeah. Yeah, so yes, I see that. That's a funny question about cougar juice, and I'll just leave it as people say a lot of things about people that drink certain wines. I think it's all silly. You drink what you want to drink, enjoy it. It's you know, if the wine's good, honestly, that's what it comes down to. Does the wine taste good? If the wine tastes good, people are gonna come back and drink it again and again and again. So I don't know if I can answer that question really more than that, but hopefully that gives you my perspective on it. Nobody should be shamed for drinking anything. I mean, even the most inexpensive wines are good in a way, right? We've spent a lot of time working in the wine industry to make the quality levels meet a certain threshold, and I think we've done a really good job over the last 25, 30 years of getting there. And so anyway, so nobody should ever be made fun of for drinking anything. So anyway, that's my opinion. Besides these Chardonnays, what is your favorite under $20? So one of the reasons we picked these was because these are some of my favorite Chardonnays in the store. So we have, you know, a number of them across our stores. We have, you know, I like the other wines from Jadot because they make a couple of other their wines that are kind of from the Mekong. So they're inexpensive. Somebody mentioned Louis Latour Chardonnay. How's that one different? That one's actually quite good too. There are some wines made from the Ardèche in France. It's a cool climate. I love the Chalk Hill. We mentioned about the Rodney Strong Chalk Hill. There's also the Chalk Hill Chardonnay, which tends to be under $20, although sometimes it goes all right. And so there's quite a bit of those that are really nice. There are some really fabulous Chardonnays coming out of New Zealand, of all things. Kumeo Village Chardonnay, that one's usually under $20. There's also one out of New Zealand called from Craggy Range called Kidnapper's Vineyard, which sometimes sits under $20. So there's quite a selection now these days of Chardonnay, and so hopefully that helps answer your question. What about butter Chardonnay? Butter Chardonnay is very nice, well made. It tells you what it is, right? It's big, buttery over the top, and there you go. And so it's nice for that. I think though my style of what I personally like is a little bit more restrained. Well, hence I like the Rodney Strong so much is because I feel like the acidity and all the pieces there. Again, it's you like what you like, but when I suggest wines, I usually like the ones with more acidity. And then do you carry? I mean, we look through all these other questions. Do you carry Coppola and Inglenook wines? We carry the Coppola wines for sure. We carry the Inglenook wines in very small amounts in our specialty stores. We have wine cases and wine cellars because they're very hard to get, but they are quite delicious. And then what is Albertson's best-selling Chardonnay? That's the last question I'm going to answer. And the best-selling Chardonnay at Albertsons is secret. I can't tell anybody. No, I'm just kidding. It's Kendall Jackson Vintners Reserve, but I can tell you that there's quite a few other Chardonnays that are chomping at the bit to take over here one day soon. So one day it'll be there. But Kendall Jackson Vintners Reserve has taken I think they've taken the crown for the last 25 years or so. So, all right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up unless there's any other questions that I can see on my phone. I see that somebody said the Russian Reserve signature is fabulous. That's awesome. I'm sure we carry Lloyd's in certain places, but not everywhere. So let's see. And I think that's it. All right. Well, thank you so much. We are, happy that you attended. We have some links that are great to visit. We thank Co-Brand. We thank Discover California Wines. And then all of our, our divisions that are joined, the Albertsons Safeway, Jewel Osco, Acme, Tom Thumb, across the country. And we hope that you can join us for our next one of these, which will be in late June. We're going to do rosé. So thank you again.